Hello everyone, welcome to the second lecture on the topic of chemical coordination and integration. So, all of you might have already heard the first part of this lecture. So, this is mostly talking about hormones and how they function to regulate all the functions of our body, the physiological functions of our body, and how they coordinate between different organs, systems that are present in the human body. So, we have in the previous part of the lecture already discussed general facts about the endocrine system, how many kinds of endocrine glands there are, what kinds of hormones they produce, where do these hormones act. We have also described how these hormones are produced by each of these endocrine systems and how they are stored and released. Then how do these and how are they synthesized also. For example, there are different kinds of hormones that I talked to you in the previous lecture, that there are those that are derived from amines, those that are derived from the steroids, and those that are proteins or peptide hormones. So, along with that, I also described to you how the mechanism of action of these hormones takes place, which differs between whether they belong to the amine group or the peptide group or the steroid group. Finally, I also started with discussing some of the hormones that belong to the endocrine system. We were moving in an order going from the top downwards. So, we talked about the hypothalamic hormones, those that are released from the hypothalamus part of the brain. Then we moved on to discuss the hormones that are released from the pituitary of the brain. Now, we are going to move on to the next endocrine organ, which is in this hierarchy. So, that is the pineal gland. So, the pineal gland is actually located within your brain. It is in the dorsal side, the top side of the forebrain. So, this is an image showing you where the pineal gland is located. Now, the pineal gland secretes a hormone which is called melatonin. Now, this is a peptide hormone, and melatonin is very, very important for the regulation of a certain event which is called as the diurnal rhythm of our body. Diurnal means daily. So, this is the 24-hour period. So, our body functions have a rhythm. So, many of the physiological functions and parameters in our body fluctuate in a 24-hour period. So, within 24 hours there is a high and there is a low, which happens to these physiological parameters. For example, body temperature, several hormones, other levels of other substances present in our blood, and so on. So, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is to synchronize this with the time cues in the external environment. For example, the length of the daytime. So, the length of the daytime varies from season to season. During the summers you have longer days and shorter nights, and during the winters you have longer periods of darkness and shorter periods of daylight. So, our body needs to get synchronized with these external time cues, so that our sleep and other physiological parameters are in sync with our environment. Therefore, we have these diurnal rhythms. So, these diurnal rhythms are based on an internal clock that is present in our body. Okay. So, this clock varies these parameters that I just talked about, body temperature, our sleep and other physiological parameters, according to a 24-hour period. Now, there are certain other factors, a part of the brain which also is called as a suprachiasmatic nucleus, which actually tries to coordinate between the external time cues and these diurnal rhythms, so that there is a coordination, so that we do not sleep when during the daytime, but we only sleep during the night time. But the length of the daytime varies from season to season. So, our sleep onset, or the time when we start to fall asleep, will also change according to the season, right. So, now this is where melatonin comes in, and melatonin, as I said, is produced from the pineal gland, and it is important for the regulation of this 24-hour rhythm of our body. For example, it helps in maintaining one of the very important rhythms, which is the sleep wake cycle and also the body temperature. Further, melatonin also influences our metabolism, Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical activity that goes on in our cells, which results in either the production of complex compounds such as carbohydrates, proteins and lipids, or it results in their breakdown. So, at the same time both of these processes are happening, and one is called anabolic and the other is called catabolic, and the sum total of these two is called as metabolism. It also helps in pigmentation in our body. So, the melatonin name comes from melanin, which is the pigment that is present in our skin, right. The menstrual cycle as well as our defense capability in the form of our immune system are all regulated by melatonin. So, with this we move on to the next endocrine gland, which is the thyroid gland. So, the thyroid gland is located in your neck region. So, if your vocal cords are here, then there are two lobes of the thyroid glands which are placed on either side just below the vocal cord. Lobes are interconnected with a thin flap of connective tissue called as the isthmus, which is present in the middle. Now, the thyroid gland is composed of follicles. All glands have cells which secrete the hormones, and then there is a lumen, and through which where this substance is collected and then it is secreted out into the blood. So, each thyroid follicle is composed of follicular cells which enclose a cavity. These follicular cells synthesize two hormones. Now, the thyroid gland actually makes two kinds of hormones. One is called tetraiodothyronine or thyroxine. This is the major one, and this is called as T4, and the other is triiodothyronine or T3. So, why are these labeled as T4 and T3? That is because of iodine. So, the number of iodine atoms that are associated with each of these refers to this T4 and T3. So, if there are 4 of them on the tyrosine amino acid, then this is called as T4. If there are only 3 iodines, then it is called T3. So, as is obvious from what I have told you so far, iodine is a compound that is essential for the normal rate of hormone synthesis in the thyroid gland. So, this you must bear in mind when we talk about subsequently about what kind of disorders happen when the thyroid gland does not function properly. Before we talk about the disorders, let us talk about the physiological functions of the thyroid hormones. So, what are these physiological functions of the thyroid hormone? The thyroid hormone actually does multiple things, it has multiple effects, but these are mostly manifested because of an increase in cellular metabolic activity. I just talked about what is metabolism. It is sum total of all the chemical reactions that are going on inside your cells, which results in sum total of all the anabolic as well as catabolic activity, and this is very important for the functioning of your body. So, thyroid hormone actually regulates the cellular metabolic activity, and it also as a result plays an important role in regulating the basal metabolic rate of your entire body. So, at the cellular level it has certain effects. Thyroid hormone increases the number and size of mitochondria. I am sure you have heard of what a mitochondria is, because you are familiar with the organelles that are present inside a cell. So, a eukaryotic cell, which is a cell that is present in the human body, has a lot of subcellular structures. So, the cell is made up of a cell membrane, then it has a lot of it has a nucleus where the DNA is present, and then it has a lot of organelles. You have heard of the endoplasmic reticulum, you have heard of the Golgi stacks, and then you have heard of the mitochondria as well. So, these mitochondria are very specific organelles which are required for the production of ATP. ATP is a very important molecule within your cell, because it is what is called as the energy currency. So, anything that requires ATP or energy, mitochondria is the person or the guy that provides this energy for whatever metabolic reaction that requires it. Therefore, if thyroid hormone increases the numbers of mitochondria as well as the size of the mitochondria is able to better produce more ATP and therefore help in increasing the metabolic activity. Now, thyroid hormone also has another effect on the cells. At the cellular level, it increases the active transport of ions across the cell membrane. What do we mean by active transport? So, now membranes have these channels which I referred to before, and these are present in all cells, and they allow the passage of different molecules depending on their selectivity and depending on the concentration of the gradient of concentration of these molecules outside and inside the cell. So, if something is present more outside, it will tend to diffuse through these channels if they are open. Now, if there is less of this molecule outside the cell and more inside, it will naturally tend to diffuse out of the cell because it is going down its concentration gradient. But if the cell needs to get more of the substance inside, it uses a trick which is the use of active transport. So, it uses energy currency ATP, which I just mentioned before, and then it is able to bring in a molecule against its concentration gradient into the cell. So, that is what is called as active transport. So, many ions also are active transport, undergoing active transport. So, thyroid hormone actually helps in activating the active transport of these ions across the membrane. Okay. Another effect of thyroid hormone is to regulate carbohydrate, fat and protein metabolism. So, in our body, these are the basic biomolecules which form the building blocks of our body: carbohydrates, fats and proteins, and another very important component called nucleic acids, right, which comprises of DNA and RNA. But here we are talking about mostly carbohydrate, fat and proteins. Now, carbohydrates are present in many forms in your body. The storage form is called as glycogen, which is actually a number of glucose molecules that are attached to each other. So, they form a long string of glucose molecules, and this is what is called glycogen. Fat can also be stored in this form. So, instead of having a long chain of fatty acids, the fatty acid actually complexes with another molecule called glycerol, and 3 fatty acid chains are joined to one glycerol molecule, and this makes a triglyceride. So, most of the fat that is stored in your body is in the form of these triglycerides, which are present in fat cells, which are called as adipocytes, right. Proteins are also made up of long strings of amino acids. So, these are all polymers. What do we mean by polymer? Polymers are chains of made up of a single unit repeated multiple times. Glycogen is a polymer of glucose. Triglyceride is not really a polymer, it just contains 3 fatty acids, but proteins are polymers of amino acids, right. So, here is an example of glucose molecule and here is an example of a fatty acid. So, you see this is the glycerol and it has one fatty acid chain, another fatty acid chain and a third fatty acid chain attached to it in this way, right. So, thyroid hormone actually regulates the carbohydrate, fat and protein metabolism. What do we mean by that? It leads to regulation of the breakdown of, it decides whether you need to break down the glycogen into glucose. When you need free glucose to metabolize it to produce energy, you need to break down the stored glycogen, or do you need to break down the stored triglycerides to produce the fats, which will also be used for producing energy, or do you need to break down the proteins, which are also can be used for the production of energy when needed. Now, the last but not the least, thyroid hormone, actually this is not the last function, thyroid hormone also influences the maintenance of water and electrolyte balance in the body. Now, I do not think I have to tell you which organ this takes place in. This is in the kidney. This is actually an image of a nephron. This nephron is the basic unit of a kidney, and here you can see that this is the structure at which the filtration of substances from the blood takes place, and then different substances are either reabsorbed back into the blood or they remain in this yellow colored tube, and this yellow colored tube is finally being attached to this longer straighter tube, which which is called as the collecting duct, and this finally exits out of the kidney in the form of the ureter, which carries the urine. So, this is the mechanism for production of urine. So, thyroid hormone actually influences how much of the water is going to be filtered out and how much of it is going to be reabsorbed, and also along with the water lots of ions, which are the electrolytes like sodium, potassium, phosphate ions. These are also filtered and absorbed depending on the needs of the body. So, this thyroid hormone also influences. So, lastly, the thyroid hormone has been shown to support the process of red blood formation, red blood cell formation. So, you are familiar with the red blood cells, which are also known as RBCs. So, these red blood cells sometimes they have a turnover rate of about 120 days, but also under certain circumstances you need to increase the production of the red blood cells, because either you have lost a lot of blood, because of which the oxygen carrying capacity of your blood has decreased, or you have gone to a place where there is very little oxygen in the air. The oxygen tension in the air is very little, for example, at very high altitudes, like for example, in Ladakh. So, there you would the processes would stimulate your body to make more RBCs, and thyroid hormone actually helps with that. So, now that we have learnt about the physiological functions of the thyroid hormone, we can see that it is quite widespread and it influences many different processes in the body. Now, you can predict from that if you have a malfunction in the thyroid hormone production process or something wrong with your thyroid gland, you are going to get a very severe disease, and this disease can be of two kinds. It can be what is known as hyperthyroidism. So, hyper means more. So, there is more activity of the thyroid gland, which means you have excess amount of thyroid hormone being produced than what is normally required. So, as is written here, increased production of thyroid hormones. Now, how can this happen? This can happen either due to a cancer of the thyroid gland. What does cancer mean? Means when the number of cells that are normally present in the thyroid gland increase in number, because there is a tumor formed in the thyroid gland. So, all these thyroid gland cells are specialized to produce thyroxine or thyroid hormone. So, when they increase in number, naturally the production of thyroid hormone goes up. And also if there are nodules present within the thyroid gland, which again causes an increase in the cell number, this can lead to increased production of thyroid hormone. What are the symptoms? The symptoms are variable. There can be a lot of symptoms. So, you can have a very high state of excitability, intolerance to heat, because normally thyroid hormone produces more heat because it increases the metabolic rate. So, there is more production of heat as a byproduct of these metabolic processes. Increase in sweating, which is the mechanism to cause heat loss, because there is more production in heat. So, then the body's physiological mechanism will kick in to try to reduce the body temperature, and it will induce sweating. Then mild to extreme weight loss, because of the high rate of catabolism or breakdown of proteins and fat and carbohydrates in your body. So, there will be weight loss. Varying degrees of diarrhea, because it affects the function or the motility of the gut. Then muscle weakness, nervousness or other psychic disorders, extreme fatigue but inability to sleep, and tremor of the hands. So, these are some of the various kinds of symptoms that have been observed, and these are characteristic of hyperthyroidism. So, hyperthyroidism often causes an enlargement of the thyroid gland in front of your neck, which is called as goiter. Now, we look at the other extreme, which is called as hypothyroidism, meaning lower than required activity of the thyroid gland or lower than required presence of thyroid hormone. So, this is caused by decreased production of thyroid hormone. Okay. One of the major causes of this is a deficiency of iodine in our diet. So, to counter this, as you all know, nowadays we get iodized salt, because if we do not eat foods that have iodine in them naturally, our diet will become deficient in iodine, and as a result our body will not get the amount of iodine it needs to make thyroid hormone. As I said before, iodine is absolutely essential for the production of thyroid hormone. So, this will result in hypothyroidism, and as a result of this there is an enlargement of the thyroid gland, okay, because the system is saying that there is not enough thyroid hormone being produced. So, there is a feedback mechanism. So, if you go back to the previous lecture where I discussed that there is this hierarchical control system for all these hormones. So, if you remember, there is a thyrotropin releasing hormone which is secreted from the hypothalamus. This acts on the pituitary and releases TSH, which is called as thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, this thyroid stimulating hormone acts on the thyroid gland and increases the production of thyroid hormone. Now, if the system is sensing that there is no thyroid hormone there, then it feeds back onto the hypothalamic pituitary axis and it tells the system to produce more thyroid hormone, and it does so by using increasing the production of TSH. Now, the TSH acts on the thyroid gland, and one of the effects it has is causing the thyroid gland to become bigger and more number of cells are produced, and these thyroid cells however are not able to produce any thyroid hormone because there is no iodine. So, hence this is a futile effort, but it takes place nonetheless. And what this results in is an enlargement of the thyroid gland, which again looks like a goiter. So, this enlarged thyroid gland is very similar to what was observed in hyperthyroidism as well, but the cause is completely different. Now, what are the symptoms? They are kind of opposite to what I just discussed about during hyperthyroidism. For example, some of them are opposite, some of them are very same. Here you have fatigue, but you have extreme sleepiness or lethargy, because the metabolic rates of the body have gone down. Muscles have become sluggish, slower heart rate, decreased cardiac output, decreased blood volume. There is an increase in tendency to increase the body weight because the anabolic processes are more than the catabolic processes. Again, gut motility is affected, but now there is a decrease in gut motility. So, you get constipation and also mental sluggishness. Now, if this process of hypothyroidism occurs in a pregnant woman, it causes a defect in the maturation of the baby, and this leads to a very devastating developmental disorder which is called as cretinism. So, cretinism is actually multiple symptoms are exhibited. There is stunted growth, overall growth of the baby is affected. Not only that, the development of the brain is particularly affected. So, you have mental retardation, there is low intelligence, there is abnormalities in the skin, and because of the abnormal development of some of the sense organs, there is deaf mutism. So, all of these are together known as cretinism, and they can happen if the pregnant mother's diet is deficient in iodine. In adult women, thyroid hormone also has another effect, which is on the menstrual cycle, and it can cause the menstrual cycle to become irregular. Lastly, the thyroid gland, in addition to secreting the T3 and T4 thyroid hormones, it also secretes another protein hormone called as thyrocalcitonin or TCT. So, this is actually important for regulating the level of calcium within the blood. Calcium is a very important ion within our body because it is required for regulation of multiple processes. Calcium ions are required for the process of muscle contraction, they are required for the process of conduction of nerve impulses, because at the level of synaptic transmission you require calcium ions. Then calcium ions are required for the activity of many different enzymes within your cell. So, calcium is a very important ion, and hence it is important to regulate the level of calcium within the blood, not to speak of the fact that calcium is required for your bones and teeth as well. And as we will see, why you need to have this calcium level maintained for normal physiological functions. So, with that we will move on to the next gland, which is called as the parathyroid gland, and this is appropriate because now I will tell you the role of parathyroid gland in maintenance of calcium levels within the body. So, the parathyroid gland in humans, there are 4 of them. So, before this you just looked at a picture which showed you the thyroid gland. So, if this was the vocal cord, the thyroid gland was present in a bilobe structure in front. Now, if you just turn it around on the back side, you can see that there are these 4 dot like structures shown here. These are the 4 parathyroid glands which are present on the back side of the thyroid gland, one pair each in the 2 lobes of the thyroid gland. So, the parathyroid gland predictably secretes a peptide hormone called as the parathyroid hormone, abbreviated as PTH. Now, the secretion of PTH is regulated by circulating levels of calcium. So, there is a sensor for calcium in your blood, and when these levels fall, this leads to increase in the secretion of PTH. This stimulates the parathyroid gland to produce more PTH, and parathyroid gland therefore it increases the calcium levels in the blood. I will tell you how it does so in a little while, but therefore you can understand why this whole system is in place. So, when there is a decrease in the calcium levels in the blood, this indicates that you need more calcium. So, then the system is activated to make more parathyroid hormone released from the parathyroid gland, which acts to increase the levels of calcium and bring back the calcium levels to normal. This is called homeostasis. So, bringing the balance back is happening through the parathyroid hormone. Now, the parathyroid hormone, how does it actually do this? So, if you look at our body, there are multiple places at which calcium is being modulated. Okay. If you look at the gut, in the diet we take in about on an average 1000 milligrams of calcium through our diet in the day. Now, within the intestines about 350 milligrams of this is absorbed, and again some 250 milligrams of this are secreted back into the gut, and then therefore, only 100 milligrams of this is retained, and 900 of the 1000 that we intook in our diet actually is excreted through the feces. Now, in the kidneys, when there is a filtration of blood, with that a lot of calcium ions are also filtered out. So, about 9980 milligrams a day. Then in the tubules of the kidney, these calcium ions are again reabsorbed. So, almost 9880 milligrams of a day are reabsorbed. So, the net result is that only 100 milligrams of this is being excreted in the urine, right. Another very important place where there is a exchange of calcium between the body and the circulation is in this organ called as the skeletal system or the bones. So, the bones are made up of calcium phosphate. So, here you have a daily turnover of bone. So, bone is a tissue that is getting turned over daily. So, you have a breakdown of bone which releases calcium, and this gets absorbed back into the blood, and then again there is blood calcium which is being taken to form new bone every day. So, this there is a balance of. So, equal amount of calcium usually is taken up from the blood to make new bone, and equal amount of calcium is also being released from the breakdown of the bone each day. So, that you maintain a constant amount of calcium within the bones. Now, both of these all three of these processes can be regulated by parathyroid hormone. So, parathyroid hormone can act on the bones, and it stimulates the process of bone resorption or demineralization, meaning releases more calcium from the bone than allowing it to take up. So, what is the purpose of parathyroid hormone? Remember, it is sensitive to lowered calcium levels in the blood. So, it wants to increase the circulating calcium levels, so it can tap into the bone for that, right. Now, it creates an imbalance between these two processes. In case of the kidney, it can also stimulate the reabsorption of calcium by the renal tubules. So, what will happen, then more will get reabsorbed. So, less will get excreted out in the urine and the blood calcium levels will go up. Similarly, in the gut also more calcium can be absorbed from the digested food, and this will allow less of it to be excreted out with the feces. So, through all these three methods, parathyroid hormone can increase the blood calcium levels. So, therefore, parathyroid hormone is called a hypercalcemic hormone, hyper meaning more, and calcemic means calcium level in the blood. So, it increases the blood calcium levels. So, remember, together with the other thyrocalcitonin hormone that was released from the thyroid gland, PTH plays a significant role in calcium balance, maintaining the calcium balance within the body. Then we are going to move on to the next structure. So far we were talking about all the endocrine glands in a hierarchical manner. We started out in the previous lecture with the hypothalamus, then the pituitary, then we moved down to the pineal gland, then we moved down to the throat region where we talked about the thyroid and the parathyroid glands. Then we are going to move further down. So, the front of the chest, which has the thymus gland. So, the thymus gland is a lobular structure, meaning it has lobes located between the lungs behind the sternum on the ventral side of the aorta. So, these are a lot of terms, let me explain it to you. You know what the lungs are, right? So, on the lungs there is a bone in front of your chest which is called as the breastbone. So, this is the sternum, okay. So, it is behind the sternum, okay, and it is on the ventral side of the aorta. So, aorta is this big blood vessel that comes out of your heart, right. So, it is behind on the ventral side of this. Now, what does this thymus gland do? It plays a major role in the development of the immune system. If you remember what I talked about when I talked about the blood, I said that there are some blood cells which are called as T lymphocytes. So, this T of the T lymphocytes come from thymus, because these T lymphocytes are produced in the thymus gland. So, during the development of the immune system, it has a acts as a nursery for the T lymphocytes. This gland secretes peptide hormones called as thymosins. So, these thymosins are, other than functioning as the nursery for the T lymphocytes, it plays thymosins actually play a main role in differentiation of T lymphocytes. So, T lymphocytes are formed from precursor cells which come from the bone marrow. See, these bone marrow have cells which are giving rise to all the blood cells that you see in the blood, of which T lymphocytes is one of them. So, they have to be differentiated into T lymphocytes. The bone marrow stromal cells are not the bone marrow stem cells are not actually having the characteristics of T lymphocytes. So, through this process of differentiation which is taking place by the action of thymosins, you get the T lymphocytes, and T lymphocytes are a major component of our immune system, because they provide what is known as cell mediated immunity. Therefore, thymus gland is very important for the development of cell mediated immunity. So, the other arm of the immune system is what is called as humoral immunity. So, humoral immunity is provided by antibodies. Why are these two things different? Cell mediated immunity is because there is a cell involved in this. So, these are called two types of cells, T lymphocytes and T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. The T lymphocytes are the ones that have two kinds, T helper cells and cytotoxic T cells. So, these are the arm that form the cell mediated immunity, because they release many proteins or factors which help the immune system, which boost the immune system. And the humoral immunity comes from components like antibodies, which are not cells, but are secreted from cells. So, the B cells produce the antibodies and release them out, which makes the other arm of the immune system. But thymosins also play an important role in the production of these antibodies. Now, thymus is there mostly in very young children. So, it is there at the largest size in the pre-teenage years, and with the advancement of age the size of the thymus gland decreases. It is quite small in the adult, and with the progression of age in very old individuals it decreases to such an extent that it almost degenerates, and with this degeneration of course the production of thymosin goes down. Therefore, all the benefits that the individual had from the production of thymosins have also gone. So, this results in weakening the immune system of old people. Okay. Let us again move down the hierarchy. Now, we have come to the next structure, which is called the adrenal gland. Now, the name adrenal itself explains what it is. Adrenal, renal means kidney. So, this gland is located right on top of the kidney. It is sitting on top of your kidney and it looks like this. So, our body has one pair of adrenal glands because we have one pair of kidneys. So, this is one of those kidneys shown here, and you can see on top of the kidney is sitting the adrenal gland, and this is a magnified image of the cross section through the adrenal gland, and it shows you that the adrenal gland is made up of two structures. The inner core is called as the medulla and the outer layer is called as the cortex, and these two are not only structurally different, they are also functionally different because they produce different kinds of hormones, as we shall see. So, the first type of hormones that are produced by the adrenal gland are called the catecholamines. These are the hormones that are produced by the medulla part of the cortex of the adrenal gland, which is situated in the center. Okay. So, what are these hormones? They are called as adrenaline or epinephrine, which is the same name for adrenaline, and another one called noradrenaline or norepinephrine. Okay. These are both derived from tyrosine through the action of several enzymes which causes several modifications, and together this epinephrine and norepinephrine are called as catecholamines, and these are amine hormones. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are rapidly secreted in response to stress of any kind and during emergency situations. Now, if you recall, when I talked about the nervous system, I mentioned that there is a peripheral nervous system which has two branches known as the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, right. So, the parasympathetic nervous system was also involved in this response, which is known as fight or flight response. So, whenever an individual is faced with an emergency situation, for example, some form of a danger, say you walked out of the door of your house and you saw a tiger in front, you can have only two options, either you run away or you stay and fight with the tiger, right. So, this kind of a situation is what is known as an emergency situation, and this leads to the production of emergency hormones or hormones of fight and flight, which are these adrenaline and noradrenaline, right. So, these will actually help you either run away from the situation or help you fight whatever the situation is, so that you win, and the end result is that you do not lose your life. So, these hormones help you to survive. What do they do? So, these hormones have multiple effects. The first effect is to increase alertness and cause pupillary dilation. So, the pupil is the hole in front of your eye in the iris which allows light to get in. Okay. So, if you have pupillary dilation, that means more light can get in. So, in a situation where there is an emergency, you need to see better, right. So, in order to see better, you need more light to get into your eye to fall on your retina. So, the pupil dilates. Then it causes piloerection. What is piloerection? Raising of hairs. So, all of you are aware that your skin has these hairs which are present, right. So, in mammals other than humans, there is a lot of body hair and it serves a lot of functions, right. One of which is intimidation. So, certain animals, if you see, when they are actually faced with an enemy, their hairs will stand on end, and that creates the illusion that it is a bigger animal, the animal looks more aggressive, and that is a defense mechanism, right. So, similarly, this defense mechanism is present in our body also, although we have very few hairs. So, this is an evolutionary relic or evolutionary remnant. So, when we had lot of body hairs, if we had lot of body hairs, the contraction of this piloerector muscles would cause the hair to stand on end, and this serves two purpose: for the preservation of heat, body heat. It traps the body heat and does not allow it to be released when you are feeling cold, and in the danger situation it helps you to intimidate your enemy. So, this also takes place, and sweating is a mechanism which is also activated at the same time. The other thing that happens is the increase in heartbeat and the strength of the heart contraction. This happens because you want to fight or you want to run away. For that you need a lot of oxygen, and oxygen comes from the blood circulation. So, if your heart pumps faster, it is going to supply more blood to your muscles. As a result, you are going to be able to run away or fight better. Similarly, there is an increase in the rate of respiration. Obviously, you need to breathe in faster, so that you get in more oxygen faster to your muscles, right. So, therefore, the rate of respiration increases. Then you can also stimulate other metabolic processes. For example, for your muscles to really work hard, they need energy, a lot of energy in the form of ATP, and ATP comes from glucose. So, metabolism of carbohydrates and lipids and proteins ultimately results in the production of energy in the form of ATP, right. So, the breakdown of glucose and lipids like triglycerides will take place, and this is stimulated by the catecholamines. Now, let us move over and talk about the hormones of the adrenal cortex. So, this is the outer layer of the adrenal gland, which is called as the adrenal cortex. Now, it has three different zones. The innermost layer is called zona reticularis, then outside is zona fasciculata, and then there is the zona glomerulosa. So, the zona glomerulosa produces certain hormones, and the middle and the inner layer produce another set of hormones, which I am just going to describe in the rest of this lecture. So, the adrenal cortex secretes many steroid hormones. So, note the difference: the catecholamines were amine hormones, and these are steroid hormones, which are called as corticoids, right. The corticoids are of two kinds. Those that are involved in carbohydrate metabolism are predictably called glucocorticoids. In our body, cortisol is one such main type of glucocorticoid. There are many other types as well, which we need not go into. Now, corticoids, which regulate another function of the body, that is the maintenance of water and electrolytes in our body, they are called predictably mineralocorticoids. So, aldosterone is one such mineralocorticoid in our body. So, all of these, they are steroid hormones. So, very clearly, as I had mentioned before, that they are derived from cholesterol by modifying the various side chains of the cholesterol. The glucocorticoids stimulate many metabolic processes, predictably those that lead to production of energy. For example, what is this? Gluconeogenesis. What does this term mean? Now, glucose is required for quick production of energy. So, gluconeogenesis is the process by which glucose molecules are produced from non-carbohydrate sources, that is lipids, fats or proteins. So, proteins can be broken down into amino acids and lipids can be broken down into fatty acids, both of which can be channelized through enzymatic processes to make glucose, and this process is called gluconeogenesis, meaning new production of glucose, not from carbohydrate sources. Lipolysis is the process by which lipids, large lipid molecules like triglycerides are broken down, and proteolysis is the process by which proteins are broken down into their simpler components, the amino acids. And so, all of these processes are feeding in to boost up the glucose levels in the body, right. and it inhibits the cellular uptake and utilization of amino acids, because it does not want the cells to utilize these amino acids to make proteins. It wants to shut down the process of amino acid utilization for proteins, hence channelizing everything towards quick energy production through glucose. Cortisol is also involved in maintaining cardiovascular system as well as kidney functions. So, it has other effects which actually help in maintaining the functions of the cardiovascular system as well as the kidney. And besides this, it has another very important effect on our immune system, that is, it produces some anti-inflammatory reactions, meaning it produces substances that bring down the activity of the immune system or suppress the immune response. So, these can be therefore often used as medicines when you want to suppress the immune reaction for some reason. For example, I can give you one example of this is when an organ is donated from one individual to another individual. Now, it is very difficult to get a perfect match. So, what will happen? The new individual who is getting this organ will be able to detect that it is a foreign, it is coming from a foreign source, and our body's immune system is geared to attack anything that comes from the outside. So, in order for this graft of the organ to be accepted by the new host, you need to suppress the immune system. So, very often corticoids or corticosteroids are given to such individuals to help to suppress the immune system and help the newly grafted organ to get accepted by that individual's body. Now, another effect of cortisol is to also stimulate the production of red blood cells, just like we had learnt about thyroid hormone in the previous part of the lecture. Then the other corticoids, which are the mineralocorticoids. So, these mineralocorticoids are mostly aldosterone. So, aldosterone is a major mineralocorticoid, and how does it function? To regulate the electrolyte and water balance in our body is by acting at the level of the renal tubules. Remember, I showed you the structure of the nephron before. So, the nephron has this structure which is called as the glomerulus, where there is the filtration of substances from the blood taking place. So, here the formation of the urine happens. So, this urine travels through these tubules and then it goes through a structure called the Henle's loop, and then finally it goes through another set of tubules and finally gets into the collecting duct. Okay. So, aldosterone acts at the level of the collecting duct to regulate how much of these ions, the sodium and water, is excreted out, and also potassium and phosphate ions, how much of these are being reabsorbed versus not being reabsorbed and allowed to be excreted out through the urine. So, this process is regulated by aldosterone. So, obviously, the effect of aldosterone would be to help in maintenance of the following. One is the electrolytes, which comprise of the sodium, potassium and phosphate ions. Of course, it regulates water reabsorption. So, it will regulate the body fluid volume, how much water is there in the body fluids. Because it regulates the body fluid volume, it will regulate the osmotic pressure, which is because of how much of solutes are present within the water. If the water level changes, the concentration of solutes within the water will change, and this will affect the osmotic pressure. And therefore, it also affects the blood pressure because of all of these processes. So, therefore, it is a very important regulatory enzyme which is important to maintain the physiological levels of water and ions in our body. Now, we will move on to a completely different organ which is present much lower down in your abdomen, which is called as the pancreas. Okay. So, you have already probably heard of the pancreas. It is a very important digestive organ, and it also performs other functions which we will see now. So, pancreas is actually a composite gland. It is made up of two kinds of cells, those that perform an exocrine function and those that perform an endocrine function. Exocrine is because it secretes certain digestive enzymes, and these are the exocrine part, and it also secretes certain hormones which performs the endocrine function. It consists of certain groups of cells which are organized into what is called as the islet of Langerhans. There are about 1 to 2 million of these in a normal human pancreas, but they form only 1 to 2% of the pancreatic tissue. So, majority of the pancreatic tissue is for the purpose of the exocrine function, which is the secretion of digestive enzymes. But these islets of Langerhans, even though they are only 1 to 2% of the total pancreas, they perform a very, very important function. So, there are two kinds of cells within these islets of Langerhans. They are called as alpha cells or beta cells. And what are their functions? So, the alpha cells will secrete a hormone called as glucagon, while the beta cells will secrete a hormone called as insulin. Now, let us talk about each of these two hormones. You all obviously heard about insulin. So, insulin is a very, very important hormone for our body functions. It is a peptide hormone and it plays a major role in the regulation of glucose homeostasis. So, the blood glucose levels are very critically regulated within a certain range. So, you might have heard somebody in your family mention this, that they have high blood sugar. What do they mean? They mean that they have higher than normal levels of blood glucose in their circulation. So, this level has to be maintained within normal limits by insulin and another hormone which we will talk about, which is glucagon. So, insulin acts mainly on a lot of body cells such as hepatocytes and adipocytes. What does trigger the function of insulin is right after you take a meal, what happens is your blood glucose level will go up, because the carbohydrates that you have taken in your food have been broken down into glucose and they have been absorbed in your gut, and they have been therefore contributing to the rise of the blood glucose level. So, this will stimulate the production of insulin, because insulin wants to bring the blood glucose level down to normal. So, what does it do? It acts on adipocytes, which are fat cells, and hepatocytes, which are liver cells, and it enhances the glucose uptake and utilization by these cells. So, fat cells will use it to convert it into fat and store it for the purpose of future needs, because that is the purpose of storage of fat, and liver cells will also metabolize it and convert it into glycogen and store it, when in the future you may need it later. So, this glucose molecule gets polymerized to form these long chains of glycogen, and it gets stored into the hepatocytes, and in the adipocytes it gets converted into fat or triglycerides and gets stored. As a result, there is a rapid movement of glucose from the blood to the hepatocytes and adipocytes, and the end result of it is hypoglycemia or decrease in the blood glucose level. Therefore, this is a hypoglycemic hormone. It decreases the blood levels, and insulin also stimulates the conversion of glucose to glycogen, which, as I said, in the hepatocytes glycogenesis or production of glycogen happens. So, this is the structure of glycogen. As I told you before, it is a branched polymer of glucose, meaning each of these box structures is amplified over here. So, you can see it is a lot of glucose molecules one after the other joined to each other, and at some points you have branches in this. So, you have one chain of glucose molecules and another branch forming over here, which goes off as another chain of glucose molecules, and this is how carbohydrates are stored in animal cells. Glucagon, on the other hand, has a completely opposite function. Glucagon is also a peptide hormone, and it also plays an important role in maintaining the normal blood glucose levels, but it acts as a hyperglycemic hormone. Again, it acts on the liver, which are the hepatocytes, and stimulates the opposite of what insulin does, which is glycogenolysis or breakdown of glucogen. So, glycogen will be, which is this chain of glucose molecules, will now be broken down into single glucose molecules, right. In addition, it stimulates the process of gluconeogenesis. Remember gluconeogenesis? Production of glucose from other sources like lipids and proteins. So, this is also stimulated by glucagon. Now, glucagon on the other hand will also reduce the cellular glucose uptake, meaning cells will not be able to take up as much glucose from the blood and utilize it less. Thus, glucagon is a hyperglycemic hormone, increases the blood glucose level. So, depending on the needs of your body, whether you have too much glucose in your blood or you have too little glucose in your blood, you get increase in secretion of insulin or you get increase in secretion of glucagon. Now, what happens if there is a problem with this? You get a disease called diabetes mellitus. So, diabetes is a syndrome where you have lot of different symptoms. You have impaired carbohydrate, fat and protein metabolism caused either by lack of insulin or decreased sensitivity of the cells to insulin, meaning the cells are not being able to respond to insulin. Okay. There are two general types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is called insulin dependent diabetes. It is caused by lack of insulin secretion. If your pancreas is not able to function properly, either due to the death of pancreatic cells or because of a genetic defect, you get type 1 diabetes. On the other hand, type 2 diabetes is called non-insulin dependent diabetes. It is caused by decreased sensitivity of all the target tissues. Remember, all the cells in your body can respond to insulin by taking up more glucose, right. If they do not do that, then your body becomes resistant to insulin and your blood glucose levels do not change, right. So, this is called type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes can be produced either if you have viral infections or autoimmune disorders where your own body cells immune system attacks the pancreas and destroys the beta cells. So, this can lead to a decrease in production of insulin, which can lead to type 1 diabetes. So, what is the symptoms of diabetes in general? You will have high blood glucose concentration, you have increased blood glucose leading to more excretion in the urine, you will have increased blood glucose leading to dehydration, then you will have chronic glucose concentration which is always high in your blood, which causes injury to your tissues, and it causes increased utilization of fats and lot of acid build up in your blood, which is acidosis. Now, type 2 diabetes, which is the resistance to the metabolic effects of insulin. Now, what happens usually in fat people or obese people, insulin resistance usually happens before the development of type 2 diabetes. So, there is a decreased sensitivity of the cells to insulin. So, they do not take up glucose in response to insulin, right, and the blood glucose level remains high. So, type 2 diabetes in contrast is associated with increased plasma insulin level. So, there is no change in the insulin in this case. So, it remains the same. Now, this occurs as a compensatory response by the pancreatic beta cells. So, those cells are feeling that the glucose level is high. So, make more insulin, but this insulin is not having any effect. Then this impaired insulin signal is closely related to, because of the lot of obesity that is present, lot of fat that is present in these individuals, the tissues have become less sensitive to the levels of insulin. So, lastly, there are two tissues left which are also producing very important hormones that are part of the reproductive system. So, these are the testes and the ovaries. So, a pair of testes are present in the male individuals. The testes can perform two functions, which is it acts as a sex organ and also as an endocrine gland. So, testes is composed of these seminiferous tubules, and the Leydig cells are the ones that produce these steroid hormones called androgens. The main hormone is testosterone. Now, androgens regulate a lot of functions. They regulate the functions of the male accessory sense organs, which is the epididymis, the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles, all required for producing the semen and the sperm, and also the prostate gland and the urethra, etc. They also stimulate the production of secondary sexual characteristics such as muscle growth, growth of facial hair, axillary hair, aggressiveness, low pitch of the voice, etc. Androgen also is important for the production of sperm within the testes, and it is also important in influencing the male sexual behavior. And finally, these hormones are called anabolic hormones because they affect protein and carbohydrate metabolism. Then we move on to the female organ, which is the ovary. So, here there are a pair of ovaries, and the two hormones that are produced are known as estrogen and progesterone. These are synthesized mainly by the ovarian follicles. So, this is a picture of a cross section of an ovary, and you can see an follicle developing, which is an egg actually. So, this follicle, when it develops, it releases this structure, which is the ovum, and the remaining part of it is called the corpus luteum. So, the follicles secrete what is known as estrogen, and the corpus luteum, which is there after the release of the ovum, secretes the progesterone. Now, estrogen again has similar functions to androgens, but in the females it stimulates the growth and activities of female secondary sex characteristics, development of follicles, mammary gland development, and female sexual behavior. Also, progesterone is performing completely different functions. Progesterone supports pregnancy, and it also helps in the lactation process by stimulating the milk production in the mammary glands. Now, finally, there are three hormones which are produced from other sources besides these normal endocrine glands. So, atrial natriuretic factor or ANF is produced from the heart. It regulates the blood pressure. So, when blood pressure is increased, ANF dilates the blood vessels to decrease it. Another important hormone called erythropoietin is produced from the kidney, the juxtaglomerular cells of the kidney, which increases the production of red blood cells. Finally, the gastrointestinal system produces lots of hormones like gastrin and gastric inhibitory peptide, which act on the stomach to increase the production of hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen or inhibit the function of the stomach. Secretin acts on the pancreatic gland and stimulates the secretion of water and bicarbonate ions, and CCK acts on both pancreas and the gallbladder to stimulate the secretion of pancreatic enzymes, bile juice, and so on. Finally, many tissues have what are known as not classical hormones, but growth factors. These factors are essential for the normal growth and repairing of tissues on an everyday basis. So, with this I will end today's lecture, and I will leave you with some questions. So, for example, the first question is, why are levels of insulin high in type 2 diabetes? So, as I told you, there are two kinds of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is because there is not enough production of insulin, because something has happened to the function of the beta cells in the pancreas. However, type 2 diabetes is not due to a lack of the function of the beta cells. So, insulin levels are normally being produced. However, the body is sensing that the blood glucose levels are still high because the cells are not responding to this insulin to take up the blood glucose. So, the reaction of the body is to then produce more insulin because it thinks that that will help the uptake of the cells, the uptake of the blood glucose by the cells. So, this is a normal reaction of the body, and hence you get high levels of insulin in type 2 diabetes. Now, the second question is, which hormone may help in overcoming jet lag? I am sure all of you are familiar with the phenomena of jet lag in today's day and age, when we are traveling by air across the globe, going from one continent to another. The times are changing rather rapidly. So, what happens is, while it is daytime in the place where you started, you are reaching another place in a very short span of time where it is night. So, your body needs to adjust to this, and because of which your sleep cycles are not adjusted, and you suffer from what is known as jet lag, or you feel sleepy during the daytime, or you stay awake during the night time. So, this is because of your change in the body cycles. So, what happens is that the hormone which I mentioned before, called melatonin, which is an important regulator of this, is the hormone that can be used to help you overcome the effects of jet lag and regularize your sleep cycle. The third question is, why is the thyroid gland enlarged if there is a deficiency of iodine in the diet? So, in many regions in the Himalayas, for example, there is a natural lack of iodine in the soil. As a result, the diet of the people who live in this region and who eat the local food are deficient in iodine. So, iodine, as you remember, is required for the production of the thyroid hormone, and without any iodine the thyroid gland cannot make any thyroid hormone. But again, the body is saying that there is low levels of thyroid hormone in the blood. What it does is this sends a feedback signal to the brain, and the hypothalamus and the pituitary will then release more thyroid stimulating hormone. And what does the thyroid stimulating hormone do? It causes the thyroid gland to become bigger in an effort, in a futile effort to try and make more thyroid hormone, and therefore you get an enlarged gland when you have a deficiency of iodine in the diet. And the fourth question is, you might have heard of this. This is an unfortunate thing that has happened today, that many athletes who compete at international events, sporting events, take steroids or take some drugs to enhance their performance. So, which hormone do you think they take in the form of drugs? So, this is actually corticosteroids. If you remember, glucocorticoids are anabolic in nature. So, they increase the process of metabolism, and so they help in the production of RBCs, which is very important for athletes because they need to optimally use oxygen. So, if you have more RBCs, you will have more oxygen utilization. Therefore, a hormone that they very often use or inject into themselves is the corticosteroids or glucocorticoids. So, with that I will end today's lecture. Thank you.